What up and welcome to the Golden Era. We've got a free agency edition here as we wrap up the offseason. We're going to start with the free agency preview, what to look out for. We'll take you through what serves to be a dramatic summer, and then we will finish it off with winners and losers of the NBA offseason. Let's do it. Let's start with what to watch for, and the biggest thing, of course, is Jalen Justice. Everyone expects his free agency to be what ultimately decides a lot of future landing spots. The Utah Jazz would like him back. The New York Knicks have been hoarding cap space to try to get this guy for the last 2 seasons. This is a huge summer. There's 5 guys who you could classify as this top-tier free agency group. Jalen Justice, Cade Cunningham coming out of Phoenix, Sidney Cross in San Antonio, Tobias Bell in Oklahoma City, and Jacob Cuxix in Minnesota. So there's a lot of big names on the market, and the Knicks are a team that have saved up a lot of cap space so that they can shoot their shot at pretty much all of them. Jalen Justice is the biggest one, though, and the expectation coming in is that his ultimate decision, where he goes, and the time it takes him to make that decision is going to hold up a lot of league business throughout, because if the Knicks miss, they're immediately going to pivot to one of those 4 guys, potentially either poaching them away from their previous spot or driving up the asking price for them. So that's the first big piece. Where does Jalen Justice go? The second big piece is, what about the trade market? So Jonathan Kuminga, all signs point to a separation after a 13-14-year career with the Golden State Warriors. Some frustrations with Kuminga and his camp around his usage. 8-time All-NBA, 8-time All-Star, now an 8-time NBA champion. Very few guys, especially on that champion spot, very few guys have that 8 All-NBA All-Star selection moniker, but it seems like that's going to be a breakup. Where does that end up going? If the Knicks miss on Jalen Justice, you better believe they're going to be interested in Jonathan Kuminga. The other big trade market name, Jair Dooling and the Cleveland Cavaliers. If Justice goes to New York, where does Dooling fall? Do the Cavs want to move him? There is not a short list of teams that want to have a two-way wing in the NBA. That is the most difficult spot to get, the most difficult player to get. And so the list of teams that would like that is the New York Knicks, the Phoenix Suns, the Golden State Warriors if they decide to move on Kuminga, Miami Heat, Orlando Magic. Pick your contender, and chances are they probably would like a guy like Jair Dooling, 2-way, 1-time All-Star. He's kind of fringe in that All-Star range, but he's a really good basketball player. What does that look like, and what does that trade market materialize itself into? And then kind of trickling down, some other names to pay attention to. P.J. Williams in Las Vegas, good 2-way forward, a little bit. He's kind of Jair Dooling light, not quite that all-star level, but really, really great starting caliber 2-way forward, can play the 3 or the 4. Ronan Diogu, and really the Portland Trailblazers as a whole, they've got 3 guys coming off that roster, either via free agency or likely via trade. That's Jalen Blackman, their point guard, likely to be traded. Elite defensive point guard, good, probably 4th option offensively, but a great point of attack defender. Evan Mobley, former defensive player of the year, is probably to be out. He's a free agent. And then Ronan Diogu, the reigning 6th man of the year, 2-way small forward, power forward. He's likely to get a lot of attention on the free agency market. That's all what we should pay attention to. Let's get to the action. Pre-agency. Where does Justice expect to meet? So, reports out of Anthony Nojic, ESPN insider, has him meeting with the Jazz. It's not a short list, folks. The Jazz, the Knicks, the Timberwolves, the Spurs, the Celtics, and the Suns all planning to meet in where? New York City. Is that a tip-off of where Jalen Justice thinks he wants to go? We don't know just yet. But that is on the first day of free agency, which is in the morning. That's announced the night before. Where could he possibly go? But before we even get to that, the fireworks popping off, because the Miami Heat and the Golden State Warriors strike a deal. Jonathan Kuminga heading to the Miami Heat in exchange for Damian Pack and Desmond Cooper. Now, there should be one more name on that list because the salary for the Warriors outgoing is more than the combination of Desmond Cooper, who's making 22, and Damian Pack, who's making about 9. So you need another $15 million to get into that range for the $50 million that is going out for the Warriors. But that trade, the finalization of it, on hold, but the details at least are there. Jonathan Kuminga and the Golden State Warriors have officially separated. 8 NBA championships behind them, the most recent one just months ago, and Miami gets a dynamic wing. It's interesting that the Heat did not think that they should wait for Jair Dooling. They said, no, we want to go out and get that guy right now because we want a guy that can compete with a 35-year-old John Morant. We want a guy that can compete with a 30-year-old Cameron Sullivan. This is a team that championship window they look and say is right now. That's Jonathan Kuminga. Bump them up to the Chicago Bulls, Brooklyn Nets category? I don't think so. But they clearly chose, and not having to give up draft picks, because if you're going to go get Jair Dooling, chances are you probably had to get draft picks. They choose Jonathan Kuminga. So a veteran group, and we haven't even started free agency, veteran group has kicked off the activities of the trade movement season in the NBA. Let's get to the following morning, July 16th. First thing. The Wolves are expected to meet with Jalen Justice and the Spurs. Why is that interesting? Well, the Spurs and the Wolves both have star point guards on their roster. Are you risking alienating either Sidney Cross in San Antonio and Jacob Cussis in Minnesota? We'll find out. The interesting part of that is that if Minnesota were to land Jalen Justice, the most logical way for that deal to make sense would be a signing trade that would send Jacob Cussis back to Utah, the same guy that Utah traded away to get Jalen Justice out of Toronto in the first place. So that's the more of the interestingness of it all. 9:01 strikes. We are meeting. Jalen Justice meeting with the incumbent Utah Jazz. Later in the morning, Celtics, Knicks, Suns. The rest of those teams set to meet afternoon as of early reporting. Across the league, we've talked about it. It's going to be a waiting game for what happens next with Jalen Justice. That, in fact, is the case. Waiting game stops pretty early, though, because just 30 minutes into free agency, Cade Cunningham and the Phoenix Suns say, we're not waiting, signing a 4-year, $239 million deal. Cade Cunningham staying in Phoenix. Now, it's not impossible that the Suns could go and get Jalen Justice. They need to include Carson Hughes and Anthony Edwards in a signing trade and then have to trade off Lawrence Marcotta to stay underneath the luxury tax, so they would be hard capped. So it seems difficult to make it happen, but they've at least got Cade Cunningham back with Jacoby Cleaves, their star power forward, last year of his deal. 7 minutes later, the Lakers and restricted free agent Cameron Mercer strike a deal, 5 years, $221 million. The Lakers, a lot of questions. Where does Mercer play best? Anthony Davis, deja vu. He's best as a 5, but he wants to play a 4, right? He doesn't want to go through the 82-game schedule, banging it up with the Abij Ojales, the Xavier Carters, the Darnell Gists of the world. Too bad. He's probably going to have to deal with that if the Lakers can't find themselves a center. So Cameron Mercer back to the Lakers, 5 years, $221 million. 11:15. The Utah Jazz and the Jalen Justice camp have separated their first meeting, and as reported by Anthony Nojic, there is a growing belief around the Jazz that Justice is not going to return to Utah. They met at 9 a.m. when it opened, the Star Guard meeting with the Boston Celtics as the report comes out. But sources say they feel as if it's unlikely that they will get Justice back into Utah, into Salt Lake City. Now they're hoping for a sign and trade deal to make this thing happen and not something like the New York Knicks. 11:30. We talked about could this kind of hold up free agency. It doesn't hold up free agency for the Oklahoma City Thunder, who strike a deal with point guard Tobias Bell. 5 years, $253 million for the all-star point guard. They got him from Indiana a couple years ago. He has helped keep the Thunder as a championship caliber team. They just made it to the Western Conference Finals. They're going to keep Tobias Bell in-house. So now, if you're New York, you've seen Tobias Bell go off the market, and rumors were that that was the preferred backup option had they been unable to get Jalen Justice. Cade Cunningham off the board. You've met with Jalen Justice. You better hope that you can get him, because 2 of the 4 elite guys, and the other 2, Sidney Cross and Jacob Cussis, are 2 guys that seemed likely to return. The Knicks' opportunities slowly dwindling. The afternoon comes. After mornings of meetings and mornings of no signings, we have a new signing. Sidney Cross back to San Antonio. The Spurs walk out of a meeting with Jalen Justice. Clearly, they get the indication that he's not coming to him. And what do? 5-year deal for Sidney Cross. He's about 31 years old, $35 million in year 1 for that deal for the Spurs and Cross. So now that's a third name if you're New York and you're looking around and you're saying, where's our backup option? Sidney Cross, no longer one of them, which means Jacob Cussis, the only other guy in the market. If you're trying to get a star caliber player in New York and you miss on Jalen Justice, you better hope You better hope you get it. But now we know that the Spurs likely out of the Jalen Justice pursuit. That comes at 4 o'clock. 2.5 hours later, 6:41 p.m., so 2:40. Beg my math. Another signing. Jacob Cuxix back to Minnesota. 4 years, $216 million deal. Cuxix, key part of that 55-win season that the Wolves had a year ago. He's going back. So clearly, Cuxix and Spur and Cross, they were not insulted by the public pursuits of their incumbent teams to go get a point guard that's unequivocally better than either of them, the 3-time MVP, Jalen Justice. But they walk out, both of them walk out of meetings with Justice and say, well, that was fun. We're not getting him. Let's go get the guy that we had already. So Jacob Cuxix back in Minnesota. Again, New York, you're looking around, and you're saying, man, if we get stood up on this date, we're going to be in a whole bunch of trouble because the 4 guys that we would have liked to be the backup option, that we would have overpaid for if we had the opportunity, bye-bye. They're gone. Back home, Jalen Justice remains a free agent. And at long last, at 11:31 p.m., less than a half an hour away from the midnight hour in New York City, we have breaking news. Jalen Justice has signed a 3-year, $144 million deal with a player option on year 4 with the Boston Celtics. Jalen Justice heading out east. The Celtics land Justice and now have, inarguably, the best big 3 in the NBA. Jalen Justice at the point. Amari Swift, arguably the best forward in basketball at the forward position. And then inside, Xavier Carter, the reigning defensive player of the year. Boston gets Justice. A huge swing, a huge connection for Boston as they try to pursue an NBA championship. We saw earlier in the morning that Utah kind of felt like they weren't going to get him. But now it's devastation for the New York Knicks, who miss out on all 5 of the best free agents on the market. All that cap space, the opportunity to play next to Louis Morgan and Ezekiel Morrow, all for naught. They do not get one of the big pieces on the market. What does that mean? Well, now we go into the trade landscape. Jair Dooling, you can expect the Knicks to be heavily involved in that trade pursuit as they try to add some piece to this talented but flawed roster that they have. The Cavs are going to have their pick of the litter pretty much across the league. Whoever wants Jair Dooling, you're going to have to pay a pretty penny because there's a lot of teams that would be interested in getting him. Makes a little bit more sense now for Phoenix. It's not a sign and trade the hard cap, so you can just take Carson Hughes, put a couple picks, the Suns don't have many of them, and go out and try to get him there. The Knicks, they've got some picks. They've got the cap space to absorb it. The Heat probably off the board. Are the Magic still interested in him? We talked about them as a potential landing spot. Does Utah try to finagle some triple signing trade into this with Jalen Justice going out? Because it will have to be a signing trade to get Justice to Boston. That's what's on deck as midnight strikes on day 1 of free agency. And at 1:01 a.m., they are burning that midnight oil in Utah and in Boston. Well, probably in New York. That's where they're sitting. But a trade has finalized the deal for Jalen Justice. What is it? It's a 3-team deal, and credit to Utah for pulling this thing off. Signing trade that sends Jalen Justice straight to the Boston Celtics. Sends Latrell Appling, the talented offensive but flawed defensive point guard for Boston, all the way out to Portland, along with Utah's 2037 first-round pick. What does that mean? That means that Jalen Blackman is headed to the Utah Jazz, as well as a 2031 first-round pick from Boston and a 2038 first-round swap from the Boston Celtics. So in the loss of Jalen Justice, the Utah Jazz say, well, we're not going to reset and wait around for something else to happen. They go and get Jalen Blackman from the Portland Trail Blazers as part of that package, as well as 2 first-round picks. The second one, you're probably 2038 first, 3 years from now, probably going to be pretty good for Boston, but you add to the draft capital, you give up a first-round pick to do it, but now you have a stout defensive point guard who can also shoot the ball well from deep next to Darius Dixon. Perhaps they say, well, we couldn't operate with 2 stars in the backcourt. Jalen Blackman's a guy that we think can operate a little bit there at the point guard position next to him pretty efficiently. Great swing. Latrell Appling out to Portland. They get a first-round pick for the troubles of doing it. They now have some pathway towards tanking their way to trying to get a top pick. The following morning, July 17th. No rest for the weary, because at 8:28 a.m., the Cleveland Cavaliers strike a deal with the Orlando Magic, sending Jair Dooling to the Magic for Jason Tatum, a key part of that championship-winning team 2 years ago. The man that hit the corner three, knew it was going in. Game-winning three-pointer, looked to the crowd to appreciate the moment, as well as 4 first-round picks, unprotected first in 2036 and 2038, first-round pick swaps in 2037 and 2039. All of that to Cleveland for Jair Dooling. The Magic are looking at Trey Hunter, who's 31 years old, a 33-year-old Jalen Green, and saying, we want another chance at a championship, and we think a good two-way wing's the way to do it, and they're giving up all the first-round capital into their future to make that happen. Cleveland now has 10 first-round picks over the next 5 years, including 5 in the next 2 years. Their pick both seasons, the Magic pick both seasons, and Sacramento's pick in 2037 by way of the Jason Sanders trade a couple summers ago. New York, 0 for 6, missing out on adding Jair Dooling. Pivot to the next forward available. There's 2 of them, P.J. Williams, Ronan Diogu. P.J. Williams, after a little bit of pursuits across the league, ends up back home in Las Vegas. The Suns couldn't make a deal work. The Warriors couldn't make a deal work. The Warriors have been trying to manipulate that Desmond Cooper $22 million into essentially another signing trade to ship him off. They cannot make that happen. P.J. Williams returning to a Las Vegas team that signed Corey Flynn last summer, that has some cap space this summer. They add P.J. Williams for a team that went 41-41, a frisky play-in competitive team last year. They're probably trying to replicate that. Williams back home. 4 years, $120 million with the Las Vegas Venom. So that turns the attention to Ronan Diogu. 6th man of the year, two-way forward, the Knicks, the Suns, the Warriors. You better believe that they want to get in on this guy. Who ends up winning it? It's not going to be the Knicks, because the Knicks instead end up with Evan Mobley, the 32-year-old, 33-year-old, early 30-year-old, former Defensive Player of the Year and 3-time All-Star, signs a 2-year, $51 million deal with the New York Knicks. They say, well, we can't get a wing, we can't get a point guard, let's shore up our defense. They add Evan Mobley, still a really, really good defensive player. He shot 40% the one season he was in Golden State before he went to Portland. Evan Mobley to the Knicks. That's their consolation prize for missing out on everybody else. Probably indications they probably weren't going to get Ronan Diogu to try to be the small forward between Louis Morgan and Ezekiel Morrow. Evan Mobley to the New York Knickerbockers. Diogu signs immediately after. Where to? Utah. The Jazz and the Trailblazers engage in a second signing trade. This time, signing trade that's going to send Franklin Reed from Utah, as well as a 2039 second-round pick, to Portland for Ronan Diogu, a big deal, 3 years, $68 million for Ronan Diogu. Now hard caps the Utah Jazz at $190 million. That is a luxury tax line because of the signing trade mechanism. You say, hey, did Golden State finish that Jonathan Kuminga deal? They sure did. They do it by Jonte Taylor, who's actually coming from Miami in a signing trade. So the final deal of the Kuminga Damian Pack deal is the Miami Heat getting a all-star caliber forward in Jonathan Kuminga. The Golden State Warriors adding Damian Pack, an elite athletic guard, but flawed, can't shoot the ball well. That was the big challenge with his fit next to a non-shooting John Morant and Cameron Sullivan. They add Desmond Cooper, who's 33 years old, the former number 1 overall pick back in 2023. Great scorer in his heyday with the Detroit Pistons. He's not been that same guy. 2 devastating back injuries have really sidelined him, but he's now in Golden State, and Jonte Taylor expected to be that replacement as the starting small forward. Good. He's a serviceable two-way wing, 37% shooter from deep, just fine defensively on the perimeter. That's the replacement. Likely Deontay Dixon, who has played the majority of his career as a small forward, making that shift now, in all likelihood, to power forward for the Golden State Warriors. To round out the big deals, Carson Hughes in Phoenix. Always was the rumor he was going to get dealt. And at long last, those rumors can be put to bed because he's getting shipped off to the Washington Wizards and Zane Bennett. Washington, for 5 years, from 2028 to 2032, were one of the best basketball teams in the NBA. Won 50-plus games 5 straight years. Only the Golden State Warriors had 50-plus wins in that time span. They made 1 NBA Finals. They lost to those Golden State Warriors in a 4-0 sweep. Zane Bennett's gone because the last 2 years have not been good. 36 wins, 19 last year, and the Wizards are trying to get a little correction, a little reset of the market, a reset of their team. Zane Bennett, talented forward, heads to the Phoenix Suns for Carson Hughes. The Suns are now going to be able to move Cade Cunningham back to the point guard spot. That's where they like him, in the backcourt, not on the wing, but because of Malik Hightower's surprising departure last summer to Charlotte, they were forced to put that Cade Cunningham spot at the wing. He can go back to the guard. Jacoby Cleave's probably going to play the small forward now, which is a dangerous proposition. 6'9", 225 pounds. There's nothing small about Jacoby Cleave's probably 245, honestly. And then Zane Bennett doesn't really stretch the floor too much, so we'll see how the spacing around Cunningham, Anthony Edwards, who's still pretty good at 34, and Jacoby Cleaves goes. But the Phoenix Suns, for the third straight summer, are going to have a pretty monumental offseason move. Carson Hughes out the door, Zane Bennett in the door, as Washington fully embracing the rebuild around Carson Hughes, 26-year-old talented offensive point guard, and their most recent draft pick. Those are the big ones. A couple other things just to mention as we round out free agency. The Celtics get Jay Kingston from the Los Angeles Lakers, 34 years old, 43% three-point shooter on his career. Really good spacer at the 2, at the 3 for Boston. Mario Zoric, stretch big, probably the best rotational stretch big in the NBA. He signs with the Los Angeles Clippers on a 2-year, $44 million deal. The Houston Rockets, they add a pair of wings. Ace Jefferson, 21-year-old small forward, 3-year, $47 million deal. And Jeff Davidson, 24-year-old wing, 4-year, $83 million deal. And then the last deal, Las Vegas, they signed P.J. Williams earlier. They're also going to sign center Tariq Wheeler out of New Orleans, 3 years, $47 million deal. That rounds out the major signings in the offseason.